Thank you.
Welcome to the Excellence in Training Academy, where trainers come to grow at excellenceintrainingacademy.com. I'm very pleased to have back with us this week Dr. Willis Balban. Willis received her PhD from Harvard University and studied human stress responses and interventions as a postdoctoral fellow at Stanford School of Medicine. She is the CEO and founder of NeuroSmart, where they are developing a wearable system for enhancing cognitive performance for first responders, military members, and athletic teams. Her expertise lies in the physiological and behavioral measurements of stress and interventions for stress to enhance cognitive performance. She is the leading author on several peer-reviewed articles on the stress response in high-profile scientific journals. So, Willis, welcome back to the Excellence in Training Academy.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Happy to be here.
Now, before we talked about some of your research and some of the research around stress responses, some of the research you did around breathing protocols, but this time I wanted to dial in specifically on NeuroSmart, which is this technology that you have developed and are continuing to enhance and refine, that I think is going to have a significant positive impact on the policing profession. And maybe up front, I just want to say this. I want to thank you for your commitment to work with the rank and file police. Too many people, I think, want to work with the special operations community and the military SWAT community. And that's great, but you know, the bulk of the policing community are rank and file foundational patrol personnel. So I thank you for your commitment to working with us at this level. So can you maybe give a brief oversight of what inspired you to start NeuroSmart and this technology, and then we can talk about what it is and how you're implementing it?
Sure. So what inspired me was my research, as I was a postdoc at Stanford. And I was studying people's physiological responses and how that was impacting their cognitive performance on a game. So I created, the idea was at the time that when we study defensive behaviors in animals, which was my background in my PhD, we measure everything, right? Because we can't talk with the animals about how they're feeling, like mice. But then you switch to human studies, and a lot of it was talking, like subjective reports of experiences and feelings, which we know, which have great value, but they're not the whole picture because they go through a lot of processing before they're spoken out. So the idea of my research was to can we create a experimental environment where we put people in threatening situations when we actually measure their responses in addition to asking them about how they feel. And by those responses, I meant physiological responses. We looked at eye movements, heart rate, skin conductance, the ability to solve a cognitive task, and their latency to act towards a goal. So those were the outcomes, and it was done in a virtual reality environment with the heights, you walk across a plank kind of environment. And I did this both with healthy individuals or individuals that were not reporting high levels of anxiety, and also individuals that were reporting high levels of anxiety, but none with a fear of heights. And what I noticed was two things. One, there were certain physiological signals in the anxious population that almost predicted how poorly they were going to do cognitively. So when I saw those, I could tell. I was just there running people, one after another, looking at their responses in real time. I could tell this person is going to freeze, or this person is going to panic and do something weird. So that was the first insight. Well, I was like, well, I mean, if we can change or regulate the physiology, maybe they will perform better under stress. So that was the first question. The second insight was when those people that had these high stress markers came out of the experiment, and I would talk to them about how it went, they appeared very disconnected from their bodies. So they did not report feeling stressed or feeling, in any way different than the healthy population. Which was very eye-opening to me. I was like, okay, so which we now know, stress does this disconnect between the mind and the body. So that lack of self-awareness, that lack of connection with their bodies was very, I wanted to show them. I wanted to show them the data. This is where you were when you were doing it. This is where you are now. And let's get you through some breathing to come back to baseline, etc. So those two insights, that physiology was linked to cognitive performance, and their the people that were anxious, were experiencing stress, had a disconnect with their bodies, led me to develop a technology that helped people to reconnect with their bodies so that they can perform better under
Okay.
stress. So that was the story. The law enforcement piece was a wild guess. I didn't have any connections to law enforcement. I thought, well, who is making, who would this be useful if I made this?
Right.
Whose decisions are so important that, there's a big need that this would take on. And so that's the wild guess was law enforcement and first responders. So I pitched it to a local department here in Mountain View,
Right.
and I said, if you had this as a training tool, would you use it? And do you want to, do some pilot work with me? And they were very supportive and helpful. And that's how it started. I took the lab equipment, which I shouldn't have, but to the local police department, and we went through some training with measuring their responses. And the first revelation was, yes, it does hold for police officers as well. The ones that do have those signatures also do poorly tactically in
Right.
that simulator training. Excuse me. And then, then I decided to write a grant to the National Science Foundation to actually build a device, and that's how it started. Yeah.
Excellent. Now with NeuroSmart, can you just describe how it's connected to the individual officer when they're going through a training scenario or something? So can you just talk about the devices that are connected to them, and then what it is that you're measuring?
Yeah. So they're wearing a skin conductance sensor on their wrist. So it goes on the forearm and it sticks to, there's two sticky disposable electrodes. We're still working on the form factor, by the way. New form factor is gonna come, not this year, but hopefully in the next year or so. But right now we just have your sticky electrodes connected to a device that is about this big on your wrist, and that's it. And then the officers are wearing also a phone, an Android phone that is on their chest and facing outward and recording the video of the training scenario. And it also has the NeuroSmart app. So what the NeuroSmart app does is it collects via Bluetooth the stress data from the wrist and synchronizes with the video of the scenario, so that is available to review right after the scenario and debrief for each officer to see, where they peaked, whether they recovered well, et cetera, et cetera. So
Excellent. So now you're measuring the skin. You have these skin conductive sensors, and you're measuring that galvanic skin response to the stress response. Can you talk about why you've chosen to measure that? So, I mean, the simplest tool that we used to use was heart rate, but now we know that heart rate's not a direct correlation. And you've explained before that high heart rate is not an indicator of cognitive or emotional overload. And then now we're seeing more of a trend towards measuring heart rate variability, which still I think there's a lot of confusion, not with the scientists, but with us as lay people, because it seems counterintuitive that high heart rate variability is good, but we want low heart rate. And so but you're measuring this galvanic skin response with these skin conductive sensors. Can you talk about why you chose that response and the value of that?
yeah, so I chose it because, again, my research, I was also measuring galvanic skin response at the same time as heart rate. And what I found that in some people, while it is sensitive, some people it's just not this heart. So heart rate was not as reliable indicator of cognitive stress and emotional stress. That was in my case induced by the presence of heights and presence of a cognitive gain. So again, I'm telling this because there's no physical motion here. It's just, they're just it's cognitive and emotional. And so it wasn't as good of an indicator of that stress or load. as the skin conductance was across the board. So everyone showed a response in the skin conductance, but only some people in the heart rate. So that's kind of why I chose heart rate. In our subsequent studies that we're actually doing right now, we are recording heart rate too, by the way, in
Right.
some of our studies, and we're doing, internal research to compare the signals. What we find is a lot of times there is a good correlation between heart rate and GSR, but there are few times, for example, one example is verbal, like when the suspect is verbally assaulting the officer,
Right.
or just not compliant, but not physically, you know, there is not a physical threat, but there's, a
Right.
psychological
Yep.
threat, say. That's one of the big areas that we found a big difference between heart rate and then the GSR signal. So there are instances where GSR is just much more responsive to those things. And I think those are important for policing because there is a lot of verbal communication that goes on all the
Right.
time. And so, yeah, so basically a more sensitive measure in our hands. The heart rate variability is a general kind of indicator of stress. It is a statistical measure. I mean, as the name suggests, it's variability between your subsequent heartbeats and how
Right.
variable that is over time. So
Yep.
the more heartbeats you have in your data set, the more accurate your heart rate variability data will be. So, and a lot of wearables like, the Garmin watch, Apple Whoop, whatever you're using, they're measuring this in sleep, right? And that's just kind of a general, like how stressed your body is in a
Right.
chronic state measurement. And so that's good and that's accurate because you're not moving, you're asleep, and so that data is good, but it tells you over the course of the day or over the course of the week how stressed you are. So if you started a new exercise regime or your new diet, you change something, you want to see its impact on your body, heart rate variability is good to track over days and weeks, but
Okay.
not over the course of seconds, because you just don't have enough heartbeats in a
Right.
second to have any, so the smallest really, there are different types of heart rate variability measures, but the smallest is at least 2 minutes of recording.
Right. Yeah.
It can be used, but it's at least 2 minutes. It's not a moment to moment measure. Also, last thing, both heart rate and heart rate variability get impacted by motion quite a bit. So especially heart rate, if you're running,
Yes.
your heart will increase, even though you might not be emotionally stressed. So that's another differentiator between the GSR and heart rate.
Excellent. And I know Colin Tomes, when we talked to him about some of his research on heart rate variability, he suggested that some of the devices on the periphery, like a watch or a ring, were there was not the same level of accuracy as a chest strap. And so you see some drastic variability with that. Now you talked about, so heart rate and heart rate variability are going to be impacted by physical activity. Is galvanic skin response also impacted by that? So it's strictly that cognitive and emotional stress that's measured by the galvanic skin response?
It's more, yes, it is more sensitive to cognitive stress.
Okay.
Unless there's motion artifacts, there could be motion artifacts in the signal that, if you move your arm really wildly,
Right. Okay.
might impact sensor, but that's different than actually being impacted by running, for example. It is a measure of sympathetic nervous system activity, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, so whenever there's a spike in your thinking stream, it will be reflected in your galvanic skin response.
Now the galvanic skin response would be a more almost a real-time response to the stress in the environment. So everything goes through the brain, if I'm correct with that. And so then this is reflected in that galvanic skin response very rapidly. Is that accurate?
Yeah, yes, it's a near real-time measure in the less than seconds delay between the stimulus and the response.
Okay, so you're able to then through the use of the video, the phone that's worn similar to where we would wear a chest-mounted body camera is recording visually the data. And then you're able to link that to the galvanic skin response in the human to see at what point in this are they getting different responses. Is that accurate?
Yes, and I can show you a screenshot if that's helpful. Or maybe we could do it later too, what that looks like on the screen. But that's essentially it. You can scroll back and forth and see, how you responded to each moment in the scenario.
So people that are just listening to this, it would be similar to what they might see in an EKG where you're going to see spikes. Would that be something as a visual image? Or not?
Yeah, but it's not as it is more of a smoother signal.
Okay.
Less regular
Okay.
than EKG would be.
All right.
Again, I'm happy to share a screen and show you.
So you are able then to see that data. So so again, if I'm correct in this, and correct me if I'm wrong, say the trainer or you, if you're there auditing the training, or both, could have, say, an iPad that you would see this in real time. The officer is dealing with whatever's in the scenario, but you, so the trainer or you, if you're there at the training, would be able to see real time the individual's responses to what's happening in the environment.
Yes, so 2 points about that. There is a real-time feature.
Okay.
But we're working on getting that onto the trainer's tablet. Right now, the trainer's tablet has the ability to control the recording, stop recording, review sessions from any officer, multiple officers. It doesn't have the real-time streaming capability just yet.
Okay.
There is a possibility to do real-time streaming if the trainer is holding the officer's phone. So instead of the officer wearing it,
Right.
the trainer can hold it, and then they can see it. The other some of the departments do is they screencast
Okay.
the officer's phone to another device,
Okay.
and they can actually see everything. So so those are those are kind of short-term fixes, but that's the idea, is that the trainer would have access real time or right after the scenario, the data from whichever officer they want.
And you can record multiple officers at the same time, correct?
Yes, you can.
Now, and I don't know if this is something that you've looked at. So I believe you're a fan of fellow neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett's work, and she and others in your field talk about the brain as a predictive machine. Are you seeing some of the spikes that are predictive, like before the actual threat emerges, and then once it's clear that the subject has a gun or something else, see them coming down? Is that something at all that you're seeing, or that you're even looking for, I guess, with all of the data you're collecting?
Yes, and we do see that a lot. We look at use of force instances, for example, and what we found, which I think is fascinating, and this is again like there's two fascinating parts about that. I'll talk about the first one, which is that there is a difference in signal 10 seconds before a person uses a weapon versus points a weapon. So they're taking out their weapon in both cases, but in one of them they actually trigger, the other one they just point the weapon. And there's a difference in signal if you look at the 10 seconds before, suggesting that the person is already planning either using the full force or maybe a less force even before they do it. So that way we do have evidence that before the action there is brain processing of the threat level that we can read off the sensor, and that is indicative of what the officer is planning to do. So that's I found fascinating. The second piece that we found, these are all internal R&D that we're doing with the data that agencies kindly shared with us that use our devices. The other piece is we found a difference between the recruits and in-service. And so for the in-service guys, this difference is much higher. I think that they are a lot more tuned to what they're going to do, then the recruits were
Right.
maybe for them, it's not as big of a deal if they point or, use the
Uh,
force in the training because there's no real, they haven't had any real encounters. That's
right.
just this is my interpretation, but the
Yep.
data shows that the recruits don't differentiate as much as in service.
Right.
So that's also an interesting piece there that we found, yeah, in terms of predictive abilities that are maybe sharpened with more experience on the road and not so much in the recruits.
Well, that would make sense because the veteran officers would have experience with real world consequences of
Yeah,
actions that
yes,
the recruits can anticipate, but they haven't had those experiences, so they may not at the same level understand the real world consequences. So that would seem to make complete sense, that hypothesis on your part.
yeah, exactly. That's what we thought, is that it's a different thinking process when
Yes.
they're deploying a gun in the academy, than in the real world. I mean, the
Right.
real world officers are also in the training setting, but
Yes.
they train their brains in the real world to know the consequences.
Yeah.
So they're kind of in a higher alert state.
Yeah. Now, something that's I was thinking about with the video. So if we look at that, what's captured, and then you're looking at the data from the stress response based on the galvanic skin response, it would seem to me that this now becomes important in the debrief afterwards for the trainers. So again, if we look at that piece, and then we look at some of the latest, one of the latest research papers by Force Science, where in that scenario where they had body cameras on officers and eye tracking glasses, a significant amount of the information that the officers visually were processing that guided their decision around the application of deadly force was not captured on the body camera. So is this important in the debrief afterwards, that the officers find, or the trainers have as part of the debriefing, find out what the individual officer was attending to, what they perceived, how they interpreted that, how they made sense of that, as opposed to just going strictly off what's recorded on the phone?
Absolutely. I mean, we see this all the time because you see two officers going at the same time to the same scenario and having wildly different responses and so this device allows you to go in depth into their thinking process. If you just looked at the camera, the same, you would find the same thing because the same external action is happening, even though they have slightly different, roles in the scenario, etc. But internally, it allows you to see how they're processing the threats, what's really triggering them. Like we found an example is we found somebody's was really getting triggered by taser deployment sound. Like
Right.
there's a sound that when somebody deploys their taser. So when their partner deployed the taser, they would just get super triggered. And there's no way you can tell that from the camera, right? And so, but then that immediately impacts their decision right after. And then, but when we saw every time a taser triggered, there was a peak, we had that conversation, and then it goes back to a taser event that he had on the street.
Okay.
So that's how this device is kind of helpful to, okay, now can you take a deep breath? Can you exhale fully in the middle when you hear that taser and
Right.
bring your attention to your right in front of you, for example, like bring your attention external. So that's we find it all the time, that the body cam footage is just simply not
Right.
explaining what's going on in the officer's mind.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting point. And I believe that you've been having some conversations with Jeff Quayle from SetCan. And when you were sharing that story about the officer being triggered by the sound of the taser, what struck me is there are places where the shock knife, which sounds like a taser when it's activated, is overused or abused in training. And so that was the first thing that I wondered, did this officer have a negative experience in training with a shock knife, where just the sound then triggered that response. So again, there's so many other things that can be impacting what's going on within the brain, right? Is that a key thing that we need to understand as well?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so you wouldn't guess. Like, I mean, this is one of the things I love about what we do is all these instances. You would not guess what we find and what's triggering the officers. I mean, there are officers that get triggered by um, being in charge, for example.
Right.
If suddenly, they were the backup officer and suddenly the scenario shifted and now they have to be in charge and they have to lose their cover, which this is a stressful event, but
Yep.
for all of everybody, but you know, it's some officers just get off over the edge when they have to be. So that and so it's really, there's many other things that impact an officer's thinking
Right.
and on their own personal experiences and yeah, just so yeah, what Jeff and I will do a study with the impact of that shock knife on the officers. So that would be interesting to look at.
Yeah, and again, I think it's a great tool. It's just I've seen it misused or abused in some training environments. Do you see situations that seem like an anomaly where, based on the data that you're seeing, the response from the galvanic skin response, that the stress level appears very high, but the performance is also exceptionally high. So what you might anticipate, and I guess what I'm thinking of is Colin Tomes with his research with people that were going through a very difficult selection process for a special unit with the Australian police. He said one officer, when they were doing something at height, his HRV absolutely plummeted. But he said you could not tell by watching this officer that his performance was exceptional in this. But when they talked to him afterwards, the officer said, yeah, I have a fear of heights. So do you see that sometimes where people, based on their experience, they might be having that stress response, but they have the ability to still function at a very high level and work through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's possible. I can see that it's being possible at that level. I honestly haven't seen many examples of
Okay.
that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about stress being high. A lot of people can function under high stress.
Right.
But what we're particularly looking at, so that I've seen, if there's
Yeah.
signals going off the roof, they get really high, then but they're still like on the they're still doing what they're supposed to do.
Right.
That I've seen. What we have finding over and over again is this shape of the curve. So
Okay.
it's not how high they go, but how well they're able to maintain that high level as opposed to a constant increase.
Okay.
So this constant increase almost reliably predicts a poor performance, but not necessarily a high level. So if somebody's high and just staying high,
Okay.
that does not predict a poor performance.
Okay.
But that somebody's constantly going higher and higher and higher over the course of minutes, always, almost always ends in some suboptimal situation. So
Excellent.
that's what we're finding, yeah.
Now, I think one of the challenges with a lot of the wearable devices, and I heard this from Eric Corum, that data without insight is a lot of times useless. And I think that's what a lot of people have from wearable devices. They have lots of data, but they don't have any insights. Whereas what you have is insights from the data. And then from those insights, you are able to provide strategies. So what are some of the insights that you've gathered from the data that you've seen and collected in these training environments? And then we can talk about some of the online and offline intervention strategies that you recommend.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot. One is this, what we talked about, which is this individual triggers. So what is, just building that self-awareness. What is difficult for you? What is in the scenario? What is challenging? What is triggering you? And just kind of getting into the bottom of that and having those conversations. And so it is very individualized in that sense. So that's why I think our tool is powerful because, like you said, just a higher heart rate or a higher arousal level doesn't necessarily mean it's
Right.
bad. But knowing that you are able to maintain it and you actually function really well under that is like, oh wow, you did well this time. Look how you're doing well in your 30s, like not the age 30s, but like
Right.
30 skin conductance. That's great. So like that gives an immediate boost to the person. It's like, okay, that's, I have the data, I'm going to do that again. And then if that's not the case, it allows you to dig deeper. We had an officer where the levels were so high that I'd never seen. And so while the device wasn't triggering an alert because he was constantly high. It was just like flat out high. So, the algorithm just looks for that ramping up, not
Okay.
if it's constant, the algorithm doesn't tell you anything. But the level was incredibly high that I took my attention and I pointed it out to the trainers. And then they're like, okay, like fine, let's have him do breathing, and we had him do breathing. And later in the day, we were having lunch with the trainers, and another trainer that wasn't in this conversation of him being high says that that officer was involved in 2 critical incidents in the last 7 months. And so, we just kind of brings in this picture. So, okay, it sounds like he's operating at the super suboptimal high level and trying to really, I don't know what this is.
That's all right. It's fine.
Getting my hand, anyway. So that kind of insights about the officer, and so maybe, maybe he needs a break. Maybe he needs, a talk with the psychologist might help. So those kind of insights have been, really helpful. The other, insights are about training scenarios themselves. So we've found that, some scenarios are triggering a lot of stress, for example.
Right.
And a lot of officers are struggling with that particular scenario, usually, non-compliant, traffic stops, high-risk traffic stops,
Right.
or, sovereign citizen kind of
Yep.
things are very triggering, and those are the ones that officers struggle with. So they, that gives trainers the insight to maybe focus a little bit more on those scenarios, do a little bit more on those scenarios. We found in some cases the simulators are very effective in inducing stress, and others they're not.
Right.
So it's how you use a simulator
Yep.
that makes a difference in how effective they are. So that, our device can also provide insights into that and be like, okay, if you do the scenario this way, then that's how you should do it. That's what gets everybody's. Otherwise, it's just like it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of insights that usually we've been, kind of seeing.
Excellent. And as you're talking about that, it struck me that there are a number of agencies, especially in Western Canada, but it's growing more, that have very effective reintegration programs to help officers reintegrate after they've been involved in a critical incident. And so it seemed to me that NeuroSmart could play a critical role as the collective group, because it's a holistic approach to the reintegration, but
Yeah.
it would be a great tool in that. And the other thing that struck me is that for those agencies that use imagery or performance enhancement imagery, that when they're seeing specific events or scenarios that continually trigger officers, then they could create imagery scripts around that to have them to help prepare them for these events out in the real world. So some great insights there. So now, the other key piece that I think we often miss is the intervention strategies. So, and you talk about 2 online, so strategies that we can use in the moment. And it would seem to me that there may be 2 separate elements to that. One, it would be on the way to the call, and one would be at the call itself. And then the other would be offline strategies that we could use between calls, after a shift, before a shift. So can you just talk, maybe start with some of the online strategies that that you talk to people about, or that are part of the NeuroSmart program?
Yeah. So online, like you said, there's on the way to the call, and there's during the actual interaction with the suspect. So on the way to the call, we always talk about mental rehearsal, right? Mental
Yep.
imagery. Think about, rehearse in your mind the different possibilities that might happen, and what you learned in the academy or whatever, like that tactically, like reverse your tactics, what you're gonna do. That's very important, because it's, that's a safer place. There's still high arousal because you're going to a call,
Yep.
but it is safer because there is no immediate threat to you. So your brain is actually able to gather that information from memory at that point, and that's going to be available to you right when you're there. So, and obviously breathing, taking, just regulating your breath, just directing your attention a little bit internally at that point to make sure you're breathing well, make sure you're not holding your breath and tensing up in the
Right.
wheel. Just like few breaths, just
Yeah.
like 3 to 5 breaths where you let go, long exhales,
Yeah.
and just be conscious of where you are and make sure you're not this. So those are kind of on the way to the call.
So can we
Um,
just pause there for a moment? Because it seems to me that that's a piece we miss in scenario training.
yes.
Is that's part of the real world, but in the scenario, we just grab people and throw them into the scenario. Whereas Wendy Dorstein, one of the things that a researcher out of the Netherlands, one of the things that she talked about was, if it's normally a 3 to 5 minute drive to get to the call, can we give people a scenario, have them sit as a car crew or an individual officer for 3 to 5 minutes and imagine that they're on the way to the call and start to utilize some of these strategies? Is that something that we miss, that we talk about the on the way to the call, but they never actually get the opportunity to practice it?
Yes, I think so. I think that's very, very important. It's more than half the puzzle. How you show up, right? If you show up tense already, if you're
Right,
high already, I mean, there's very little moving space at that point. But if you're calm and controlled, there's a lot you can do. There's a
right.
lot you can think, a lot of options will come to your mind. You can, modulate your distance. You have a lot more control of the situation. So yes, I mean, in some academies, I've seen amazing training being done,
Yep,
and what comes to mind is immediately is Michigan State Police. They have a great, they set it up so well that there is a dispatch and there's,
yep.
it's maybe it's not 5 minutes, but definitely at least a minute or two of just, sitting in the car, getting a dispatch,
Excellent.
discussing with your partner what you're gonna do.
Yeah,
You can already see in a device like that's putting them at a higher level, but not so high. And yeah, so I will say there are academies that do a really good job at doing this dispatch phase. But I wouldn't say it's the majority of them
yeah.
that do. I think that's very important.
Excellent. So talk about some of the online strategies for now when the officer is at the call. And as you know, is these things, there's peaks and valleys. Sometimes there's lulls in the middle of this that might change drastically in the middle of an event. It might start off very high and then go down, or start off low and go up and then go back down. So what are some of the strategies that you have seen effective when officers are in the event itself?
Yeah, so I mean, first, obviously, I'll talk about breath, because the first thing that happens, when you're stressed or when you're tight, is you hold your breath and you
Right.
start getting shallower, which kind of kicks you into a worse cycle.
Yep.
And so we need to remember to exhale. And even if it's 1 or 2 breaths in the middle of the scenario, if you can let go of your breath and not hold it, and I think that's gonna help a lot. That's gonna go a long way, putting the officer back in charge. And what's different from, going into it than being in the moment, I think, is this shift in external versus internal attention.
Right.
There's a lot of, research that we don't want to be internally focused. We want to be externally focused for sure in the middle of the action. This is not the time to, sit down and watch your breath. You should force yourself to exhale and make sure you're breathing well, but make sure that you're aware, you're listening, and you're pointing your attention outward. And then the other thing is, I mean, I haven't yet seen a lot of studies or any studies, maybe I'm missing one too, about the lateral eye movements that,
Right.
that kind of break the hyper focus. So this is just experimental, I think, but I think it does make sense from a scientific point of view to shift your gaze laterally away from the target very briefly, to not lose sight of your periphery,
Right.
because a lot of time things happen and they're just dimmed if you are hyper focused on the threat, and if you are tunnel vision, as you call it, on the threat, the threat perception is exaggerated, and you might miss things that are happening that are important. And so just to not lose that awareness, the situational awareness, it might be good to kind of move your eyes around a little bit just to break that that hyper focus. So those are the things that I would recommend.
And do you see the kind of the two extremes? Because I know you've talked before, and other researchers that I've talked to, vision scientists, talk about the fact that under high levels of pressure, the visual system, the eyes tend to move a lot. And that what we have historically done is we tell people to be constantly scanning, and all they're doing is head turns. So in order for us to process, if I understand correctly, in order for us to process visual information, there needs to be some fixation period of like even just 100 milliseconds. But is this, we see either over fixation or a complete lack of fixation, and so there's a balance point in between?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is all you know, under research.
Right.
Well, we know that if you are already unregulated, so if your anxiety level is so high that you're not able to control yourself, your eyes will move a lot.
Right.
And that's exactly what we've shown in my study, the Stanford study on the human threat responses, is that the erratic gaze, we just cannot focus your target, your attention on the target or goal.
Right.
So we definitely want you to not have erratic gaze.
Right.
Having said that, there is the other extreme of, you know, just focusing, being focusing so much on the threat. Of course we want focus on the threats, and we do want fixation, but we don't want to be over fixated.
Yes.
So sometimes, you know, officers kind of, all they do is this, right?
Yes.
Other things happening, and you're like, come on, the guy like did that and did this. Why are you, you know, still, you know, they can't switch out.
Right.
Like the person drops their weapon or maybe starts being more compliant with their body language, but you don't notice it because you're still processing it. So that's the kind of, you know, other extreme I'm talking about, that we don't want. So I think this is an area of research that we need to, you know, gain more, like need to
Yeah.
do more of. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know Nick Murray talked about some of that in our interview, and Lee Waters, vision scientist over in the UK, and so there's all these things seem to come together, and it would seem to me that if they can learn to regulate this arousal response, utilizing some of these tools that you advocate, then some of these other things, the vision and some of the other things, come together for them. Would that be accurate? I mean, we don't necessarily have all the science, but we can perhaps speculate based on what we do know.
I think so. I mean, there's a big link between vision and the emotional arousal, and so if we can learn to regulate one or the other, we're definitely getting an inbound, like, you know, way of control of the whole system. I mean, there's a lot of studies of, like, you know, directed vision that help with, you know, basketball free throws and stuff like that. So you can, there are performance tools like that. You can use your gaze to enhance your performance.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think definitely we can, they're correlated, and we can use those to control.
Yeah, I think that becomes a key, as all these things are interwoven. Again, I'm a huge advocate of mindset training. And I think if we look at challenge versus threat states and the impact on visual system and their perception, it's going to have a different response physiologically, depending on whether they interpret it as a challenge or a threat. So, and this is why I think this is so critical that all of these things come together. So what would be some of the offline strategies? So my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is offline being, say, between calls or before or after shift or other things. So I'm not responding to a call or in a call themselves. It's those downtime between calls or things before or after shift or those other elements. What would be some of the offline strategies?
Yeah, one thing that I like a lot is body scan. So this is a part of a mindfulness kind of practice, but, you know, it doesn't need to be integrated into a big mindfulness exercise, but just scanning your body, closing your eyes at the end of shift, right before you step into the house, just checking head to toe and with every part. So what you do is you sit down, you close your eyes, and then you kind of check in with every part of your body, you know, starting from your top of your head to forehead to eyes, you know, cheeks, chin, shoulders, And all you do is just check in. You just ask how it is it feeling now? And it really goes a long way. You just automatically starts adjusting your posture and letting go of tension that you notice, even though that's not the point of the exercise. This
Right.
is not progressive relaxation exercise, it's just a scan.
Right.
Uh, you can also do progressive relaxation, which is, which is you just tense your body intentionally, and then you go head to toe and relax.
Right.
So that's another relaxation exercise. The body scan is just a quick check-in. It takes, a minute. And it really helps you ground yourself in the present moment, because you're basically checking in how things are right now. And so that's something I really recommend. I do recommend a daily mindfulness practice that has, mindfulness meditation is still the most studied
Right.
kind of mind body intervention that's been shown to increase focus, increase cognitive flexibility, which is very important, right? Ability to shift strategy, essentially. That's, which I think is so relevant to policing. So that cognitive flexibility, focus, reduces stress, anxiety. So daily 5-minute meditation would go a long way. That's offline. Whenever you do, you want to do it. Physical exercise, of course, I'm not going to go into details of that. Things like sleep, exercise,
Right.
nutrition. I mean, they're, the pillars of health. So
Yep.
those, but I won't, that's a whole different
Yeah.
topic. Yeah. So
And I think that's so critical, is that, so, when you talk about the body scan, I know a number of years ago, one of the interviews we did with Bend, Oregon. So the Bend Police Department had implemented a number of strategies, but one of them was for their day shift. That was the last 10 or 15 minutes of their shift, was a mindfulness meditation, was basically a body scan meditation to identify that, to put them in a better frame of mind when they went home. But I think it's a critical practice that I'm a huge advocate for people to have transition rituals between various roles. So transition between that cop role to when you get home into parent role, spouse role, and some of those other roles. Now the meditation, and as you said, there's so much research about the validity of that. It seems to me that one of the challenges is to get people to stick with it so it becomes a practice.
yeah.
But that would seem to me that there's a great opportunity at the academy, that if academies built it into something that was daily, that they did every single day in the academy, not just with the use of force instructors, but it was a collective thing, so that they have a 6-month practice of doing it every single day, so that it's more likely becomes a habitual response when they get out in the field. Is this an opportunity that we're missing, of taking that 12 minutes a day or 5 minutes a day or whatever, and doing it every day throughout the academy to hopefully create this practice that becomes now a habitual response?
I think it is. I think it would be fantastic. I mean, a lot of the mindfulness-based meditation practices or courses are actually 8 weeks, which would be perfect for academy. And they are 20 minutes a day, but I don't think, even 10 minutes would go a long way. Even 5 minutes would go a long way,
Yeah.
if it's done daily. Some academies, I mean, Wayne Unger, the Justice Institute of British Columbia, he's teaching mindfulness meditation. He's actually integrated now with yoga. And, like at the end of the day, recruits do what legs up the wall pose. So like, it's just a yoga pose, Purati Karani, where you just put your legs up the wall and that's it. And he does that. I think they do it for 5 minutes. He also talks about, how everybody starts talking to each other, and then 1 minute into the pose, there is no more talking. It just naturally down, because just putting your legs up the wall will activate your parasympathetic nervous system and just everything down. So everybody, stops talking. And so, I love that. I love that it is just integrated. And at the end of the day, everybody just puts their wall up to legs up the wall for 5 minutes and stuff like that. I think would go a long way. There are mindfulness like in athletic world, I know that 5 minutes of mindfulness practice before a workout does actually reduce your injuries. So that there's a lot of, because you're just mindful of your body, and so you don't do things that that push your body too hard, maybe. So there is a lot of benefit to integrating that 5 minutes on a routine basis to reduce injury and also
Absolutely.
increase performance.
And the way that a number of mindfulness people have explained it to me is that it's a practice that enhances your attentional abilities, which I think is critical for us as a profession. Now, I'm a huge proponent of performance enhancement imagery or imagery as part of a training protocol. I would like to see us weave it into everything that we do in training. We had tremendous success with that with the Calgary Police Service. And I know it's one of the things that I believe it's one of the offline strategies that you talk about with NeuroSmart is the imagery component.
Yes. That's also we're building that into the app, and it has another practice that's been scientifically shown to be very effective in enhancing performance. It does need to be, I always say it does need to be, done in a more calm state. It's a little bit like hypnosis in that sense. It's for you to be, you need to be in an open state to benefit from the imagery practice. So I recommend like maybe like a minute or two of breathing, exhale focus breathing before, and then delving into an imagery. But I think that also can be introduced at the academy level. I mean, all these things I think should be introduced at the academy levels.
Absolutely.
And,
So
and, and
we were
sorry, go
doing that, sorry to interrupt, but I mean, we were doing that starting in, so 24, 25 years ago, we were building structured imagery into, and over the course of training, we would do probably 20 structured imagery sessions with them. Everything from pure relaxation to them imagining being in violent confrontations, prevailing in that. And then we also did a lot of work with them to have them understand the power of them doing imagery on their own, independent imagery, and how to do that most effectively. So I'm sorry I cut you off there. So
no, that's fantastic. What I was gonna say is that I think academy is a great place to introduce breathing, mindfulness, imagery,
yes,
yoga poses, and really give them a toolkit of things that they might use. And I think it all comes down to practice at the end of the day.
yeah,
They need to do something daily. That's
yeah,
do imagery, do mindfulness, do breathing. I don't care what you do, but do it daily, 5 minutes a day,
yeah.
and it's gonna make a huge it's gonna be a determining factor in your career, I guarantee.
Absolutely. And again, if people go back and listen to the interview with Christian Yerbal, where his PhD research project was the integration of mental skills training into the 7-week advanced sniper course in the Norwegian Army, which is the most challenging course they have. And when they did that for the first time in the history of the course, the standards stay exactly the same. And there's 163 tests in that 7 weeks. And for the first time in the history of the course, everybody passed. So, and his thinking philosophy was that if we were to integrate these skills, as you said, at the start of the academy, so that, and give people options, that he thinks it would, firmly believes that it would prevent a lot of our downstream issues for us as a profession from a mental health perspective. So I know you have to go in a few minutes. How do people find out more about NeuroSmart, reach out, connect with you, look at getting involved? Because you have some upcoming research that you're doing, and you're doing ongoing research, but how do people find out more about NeuroSmart and reach out to get connected?
Yeah, so you can check out our website, www.neurosmartinc.com. They can email me, melise@neurosmartinc.com. And LinkedIn page. We have a LinkedIn page. We're building our Instagram also, but it's not there yet. So you can also follow us on LinkedIn, NeuroSmart Inc. And feel free to always reach out or fill out the form on the website that to get more information, and we're happy to talk to them. There are videos, testimonials, demos on the website that they can check out to see, what the device looks like and how other different agencies are using it.
And are there different levels of involvement from an agency?
Yeah, so that's the I guess the cool thing about our technology is it's very scalable because it is a device-based model. Some agency, big larger agencies can get up to, 30 devices, whereas a small agency will just be fine with two.
Right.
And also the use case. I mean, some agencies are using it for FTO training, and others are doing it at the academy, whereas the others are doing it in service. So we
Mm.
are really, it's super flexible, and we really just talk with you to how you want to use it, how you want to test it. Um, we still have the beta program open until the end of this calendar year, and then we'll close that because we have enough beta testers right now to,
Right.
just to get their feedback, and they've been super helpful. And we'll probably launch the full version next year. So yeah, but if you want to be involved in the research, or you want to just get your hands on the device and do a beta testing, please feel free to reach out to me.
Excellent. Well, Melissa, we really want to thank you for once again carving time out of your very, very busy schedule to do the interview and share this critical information. But more importantly, I want to thank you for everything that you have done, everything you can continue to do in this field. And like I said, I'm so appreciative of the fact that you're interested in working with people at the foundational level of the profession, as we need more people like you that are dedicated to that level. And so I really appreciate that. And so for everything that you have done, everything you continue to do, thank you so much for your passion, your contributions, your commitment, and for your ongoing service in this area.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you also for your service, and thanks for having me. It's always wonderful to talk to you.
Likewise. So to the members of the Excellence in Training Academy community, as always, I encourage you to let the information Melise shared simmer, percolate overnight, and be intentional. Sit down tomorrow, write out your greatest takeaways, and then write out your action steps. What actions are you going to take? And one of the initial steps would be to go to the website, check out the NeuroSmart program, and then reach out to see how you can start to utilize this tremendous technology in your training. So to the members of the Excellence in Training Academy community, as always, I thank you for your commitment to excellence both in and through training. Always continue to train hard, train smart, train with passion and purpose, and always be willing to dare to be great.